In the blistering July sun of 1187, destiny marched towards Hattin, a fractured kingdom where Crusader states were tinder surrounded by flames. Unity, elusive as a desert mirage, left noble houses feuding and Templars and Hospitallers eyeing each other like rival predators. Against them was Saladin, patient, calculating, an iron-willed unifier, setting the stage for a legendary confrontation. Tonight, we step into the arid landscape where ideals, fears, and fire collided, and where one fateful battle would fracture the Crusaders' hold on the Holy Land forever. Step with us now into the heat of 1187, into a world where every horizon hides danger and empires trembled under the weight of ambition. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, a precarious Christian outpost amidst hostile lands, teetered on the brink of destruction. This is the story of desperate men, a kingdom in decay, and the relentless advance of a united force under Saladin. Known in the West as Saladin, a towering figure in military history whose resolve would soon test the Christian grip on the Holy Land. Inside Jerusalem's walls, tension simmered as leaders strained to maintain their fragile dominance. Rival nobles and military orders, like the renowned Templars and Hospitallers, quarreled for supremacy, more engrossed in personal power than in fending off their imminent doom. Beyond the city's borders, Saladin had meticulously woven an empire from divided factions, elevating the diverse Muslim populations under his banner. The countdown to this inevitable clash, a match ignited by fervent belief and an icy dread of defeat, had begun. Our journey starts here, in a world divided by faith, ambition, and the ceaseless clash of steel. Before the dust settles, let's picture the Holy Land, a chessboard of tangled politics and religious fervor that nurtured and ultimately doomed the Crusader states. Born from the First Crusade, these Christian strongholds flourished on militant conquest, but languished in its wake, plagued by petty squabbles and unwise decisions. Misplaced priorities, civil discord, and over-reliance on military force had left them vulnerable, both politically and physically. To the north and south, allies such as Antioch and Tripoli grappled with their own conflicts, providing little more than fragile support. Meanwhile, the potent dynasty under Saladin sharpened its swords at their borders. Saladin, the shrewd architect of this Islamic resurgence, had unified regions from Egypt to Syria, knitting together an Islamic front driven by a vision to reclaim Jerusalem from the Crusaders. This vision wasn't just strategic, it was deeply spiritual. Saladin's incredible rise came from his ability to intertwine warfare with diplomacy, merging disparate Muslim factions into a formidable force. He played the long game, consolidating power, restructuring his military, and building alliances through negotiations and strategic marriages. Unlike predecessors content to raid and retreat, Saladin's methodical chokehold on the Crusader states aimed to recapture lands for Islam in a campaign marked by patience and precision, a testament to a conqueror with a broader dream. Meanwhile, the Crusader realm, a mosaic of self-interest, staggered beneath its own weight. Noble families like the Lusignans and Ibelins feuded, treating the Holy Land more as a personal domain than the bulwark against Saladin's advance. The military religious orders, with their immense wealth and influence, often outstripped the secular nobility in power, but also in disunity. The Templars, stalwart and disciplined, frequently clashed with the Hospitallers, who balanced their martial duties with care for the sick and poor. These divisions sapped the Crusader energies at the worst possible time, while Saladin's forces coalesced with renewed resolve. King Guy of Lusignan, who stumbled into power through marriage rather than valor, was emblematic of Christian leadership gone awry. Inept and contentious, his reign marred by short-sightedness and favoritism that only deepened the kingdom's peril, the Crusaders stood at a pivotal crossroads in 1187, beset by strife and drained resources. Saladin poised his forces, his eyes set on Jerusalem, knowing the time for decisive conflict was near. On this stage of spiritual significance, faith and fanaticism fueled every warrior. For Christians, Jerusalem was the compass of the sacred, and losing it was unthinkable, a blow not merely to tactical ambition, but to divine providence. The fervor of holy war pulsed through knights and pilgrims, guiding them to the Levant with a sense of holy destiny. Saladin, too, wielded faith like a weapon. The call for jihad echoed across the Islamic world, unifying disparate factions under a common religious duty and galvanizing his soldiers with the same spiritual commitment that drove their enemies. As the summer of 1187 loomed, the tension was palpable. Each camp readied for a confrontation they knew would change the fate of the Holy Land. Diplomatic gestures gave way to military posturing. As Saladin's strategic patience continued to test Christian defenses, his raids wore down the Crusaders' fragile hold, drawing them into open warfare. Not from strength, but from a harrowing desperation for one final decisive act. Meanwhile, in the camp of the Christians, a reluctant King Guy debated strategy. Torn between cautious counsel and those who believed a bold strike might reclaim their fading fortune. As the narrative edged towards the finale, skirmishes and sieges erupted, a symphony of conflict ushering in a larger war. Saladin's precise raids strained the Crusaders' ability to retaliate, each loss sending ripples of panic through the Christian ranks. Like whispers of a gathering storm, these smaller attacks foretold the imminent inferno awaiting them at Hattin. And so, with footfalls heavy upon the dust-choked roads of Old Galilee, the stage was finally set for Hattin. King Guy, urged onward by the conviction of glory and ruin, led his forces on this fateful path, unprotected by the fortresses they abandoned. Saladin, master of the moment, lured them with the promise of decisive battle, meticulously laying his trap. Here, beneath the sun's relentless gaze, ancient powers collided in a crucible of survival and sovereignty, where ambitions burned as bright and fleeting as kindling in the fires of Hattin. By 1187, the Crusader states in the Holy Land were precariously delicate, a mosaic of territories stitched together by fragile agreements and subject to rivalries and quarrels. Initially unified by the fervor of the First Crusade, these lands had devolved into battlegrounds of competing ambitions. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and others were so ensnared in internal strife that the looming shadow of Saladin's forces almost seemed an afterthought. European nobles had brought their feuds and vendettas, turning the Crusader states into a complex chessboard where everyone seemed to play their own game, while the kingdom's cohesion frayed. External threats should have been a unifying call, but internal discord was king. Local barons, more preoccupied with their own turf wars, often ignored the existential danger represented by Saladin's growing influence. This fragmentation of power left the Crusader states vulnerable, their strategies more about internal power struggles than defense against a formidable foe. Meetings meant to forge defenses dissolved into spats over rights and revenues, leaving scant room for devising a cohesive strategy to counter Saladin's cunning and calculated plans. These internal machinations drained energy and resources, leaving the Crusaders ill-prepared for the monumental challenges they faced. At the heart of this swirling tempest of ambition and warfare were the military orders, the Templars and the Hospitallers. Both renowned as warrior monks, these orders possessed not only martial strength, but also considerable political clout. Yet, like the nobles they often clashed with, they weren't immune to the infighting that afflicted the larger Crusader body politic. The Templars, with their reputation for discipline and wealth, frequently found themselves at odds with the Hospitallers, whose deeds included caring for the sick and wounded. Although both orders shared a common cause, mutual mistrust ran deep, making unified action a near impossibility. Their politicking extended deeply into the Kingdom of Jerusalem's inner workings. Factions clustered around influential knights and nobles, all jockeying for strategic positions. The political arena was fraught with shifting allegiances, where power plays often overshadowed strategic needs. Military strategies were influenced heavily by ulterior motives, with cooperation stifled by persistent internal disputes. This inability to unify under a cohesive command left them vulnerable to Saladin's meticulous war machine, which was gaining momentum. Adding to the kingdom's woes was King Guy of Lusignan, a ruler defined more by suspicion than respect. Guy was seen by many as lacking the mettle required to lead. His ascension to the throne through marriage rather than conquest left him under constant scrutiny. Unable to rally the nobility, who viewed him as an outsider apt to be manipulated, Guy's reign was shaky at best. His lack of military acumen only worsened his reputation, with many seeing him as a man about to lose, unfit for the serious business of waging war against a seasoned adversary like Saladin. The Templars played a dual role in this grand tale. At once protectors and power brokers, their rise to power saw them brimming with wealth, managing lands, and even banking, making them essential yet controversial figures in Crusader politics. Their influence spanned even the royal line, often wielding power that rivaled and sometimes exceeded that of the crown itself. Critics accuse them of prioritizing their vast interests over local strategies, their autonomous approach sometimes creating more friction than unity with the king's plans. In contrast, the Hospitallers, while equally formidable, balanced their battle cries with caregiving, maintaining hospitals that became lifelines for pilgrims and soldiers alike. Their dual focus didn't spare them from the era's divisive politics. Like the Templars, they sought influence and expansion, sometimes clashing with local lords and their Templar counterparts over resources and strategic objectives. Their presence carried immense weight in the kingdom's court, and their decisions could tip the balance of power, sometimes toward unity, but often into further discord. The echo of European politics rippled unmistakably through the Crusader states as well. Across the Mediterranean, distant monarchies viewed these lands as both holy ventures and political battlegrounds. Thus, the infighting in the Holy Land was not just a local affair, as European rulers played a perpetual game of influence, pushing their preferred factions using financial and military tactics. These complex layers of intrigue further splintered Crusader unity, compounding the already fraught task of confronting Saladin. In moments of pause, when diplomacy might have averted disaster, efforts fell futilely short. The intricate web of local alliances and betrayals often stymied hopes for productive negotiations. Every diplomatic move was saturated with suspicion, leaving potential openings to pivot away from impending doom obscured and ultimately unexplored. By the time the Crusader states realized Saladin was more than a mere threat, a coherent strategy had slipped through their grasp. Roots to unity lay tangled in mistrust and missteps. What should have been a unified force was instead a gathering of splintered ambitions, unable to stand united for survival. Saladin's forces closed in like an inexorable tide. The Crusader states, ripe with opportunity and yet devoid of decisive leadership, teetered on the brink of collapse, sealing their fate at the horns of Hattin. The summer of 1187 approached the Crusader states like an ominous shadow. Saladin, a tactician of unparalleled patience and brilliance, orchestrated an assault as much psychological as it was physical. Tiberius, a glittering jewel amid the dry landscape of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, trembled under Saladin's calculated gaze. Nestled near the serene waters of the Sea of Galilee, its strategic and symbolic significance was undeniable. Saladin's forces surrounded the city, their banners snapping in the blistering wind, a harbinger of the storm that was to come. The drums of war resonated through the streets of Tiberias, mingling with the cries of its citizens, heralding a new dawn drenched in dread and determination. Saladin aimed not merely for conquest, but for entrapment. His strategy was clear: draw the Crusaders from the safety of their stone fortresses onto the punishing open plains, where the sands whispered secrets only he knew. His goal was to entice King Guy of Lusignan to act hastily, his precarious leadership offering a weakness ripe for exploitation. In the chambers of Acre, a council of war unfolded as the echo of Tiberius's distress reached the ears of the Crusader leaders. The room, thick with the heat of debate, reflected their inner turmoil. Raymond III of Tripoli, wise and ever pragmatic, argued against rash action, forecasting Saladin's ploy. Yet there was urgency, a pull of duty anchored by ties of loyalty and complex webs of oaths sworn under the gaze of the divine. Ishiva, Raymond's wife, was trapped in Tiberias, a fact weighing heavily on the council's decisions. As shadows played upon the faces of barons and knights, the session teetered on the brink of chaos, divided between Raymond's caution and the immediate action others deemed necessary. Emotional fervor clashed with strategic sensibility. Indeed, the decision made was one born more from desperation than from tactical forethought. Saladin's entire enterprise was one of strategy and spectacle. He crafted a battlefield not with swords, but with shadows, his forces darting like phantoms, attacking and vanishing under the oppressive sun. Misleading signals rippled through Crusader encampments, and rumors painted intimidating caricatures of Saladin's forces, casting an aura of invincibility. This was warfare in its most cerebral form. Saladin choreographed the emotions of his foes, shaping their actions long before battle commenced. For the Crusaders, honor was a tangible force, an invisible standard held high as they confronted their fears. Their vows to protect Christendom pulled them forward, every soul bound by shared hope in destiny. Believing the sweaty pilgrimage to battlefields of ancestors was itself a holy act. This yearning for divine fulfillment, for the touch of God's favor in battle, overpowered cooler counsel. The weight of this promise eclipsed strategic reasoning, hurtling them towards action. King Guy of Lusignan, a monarch amidst internal conflict and external menaces, was on a pedestal of precarious authority. Beset by whispers of doubt, his leadership faltered under the pressing expectations of both title and throne. The intensity of the present situation demanded decisiveness, a trait which eluded him. Torn between allegiances and plagued by indecision, King Guy's hesitation sowed seeds of calamity, a weakness that Saladin's keen eye did not miss. Tiberias had become a fiery beacon, its defenses orchestrated by Esheva, who stood stalwart against wave after wave of Saladin's forces. The city, a microcosm of the larger conflict, held its ground with fierce resolve while flames caressed its walls, lighting the night sky. The defenders were ensnared in an intricate web of fear and hope, a choice between silent surrender and heroic resistance. Through this tumult, Saladin crafted his masterpiece of war, a vast and waiting web. His strategy was one of inclusivity, drawing unity from multiple Muslim factions under a banner of shared religious resurgence. His charisma and tactical cunning animated the battlefield, inspiring his warriors and unsettling his enemies. Here was a master who conducted the orchestra of war with deft, deliberate strokes. Scene by scene, like a master storyteller, Saladin unfurled the siege of Tiberias into a magnet for the Crusaders. Understanding their psychology as intimately as he knew the curve of his scimitar, Saladin lured King's forces with this irresistible bait, pushing them into a theater of war he controlled. He unleashed his forces in a kaleidoscope of movement, pivoting through the desert landscape, always a step ahead in this deadly dance. Even the land conspired with Saladin. The desert itself was an invisible participant, rendering the Crusaders' journey a weary odyssey through searing heat. The harsh topography transformed from mere terrain to an agent of attrition. Saladin seized every geographical advantage, turning the sun into an ally and every rare water source into a tactical linchpin, further weakening his foes before swords could ever cross. As the Crusaders moved towards the inevitable clash, the air pulsed with the foreboding tension of a gathering storm. It was a destiny woven from despair and duty. The knowledge that defeat hovered unspoken among them lent an eerie undercurrent to their march toward Hattin. With courage painted on their brows, they chased a spectral promise of glory and redemption. With Saladin's stratagem encircling them like an invisible noose, the table was set, the dice cast. At Hattin, the fates would be drawn and inked into the annals of time. In the blistering July sun of 1187, King Guy of Lusignan made a decision that would decide the fate of thousands. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky, and barren as the Crusader army set out on a path driven by ambition and desperation. Counselors' voices merged into a chorus demanding action, and the cries for decisive measures reverberated through the encampment. Among the ranks, a tense mixture of fear and misguided valor boiled over. Despite sage advice urging caution, King Guy chose to break from the safety of fortifications. The gamble was steep. Victory could consolidate Christian power in the Levant. It was a necessary risk. Blinded by tales of glory and divine destiny, the vast army trudged onward, oblivious to the scorching nightmare lying ahead, leaving behind ample water supplies and shelter. Soldiers and officers alike baked under the merciless sun, akin to a vivid inferno that mocked their very survival. As they moved, the dust rose, adding a dense layer to the air, making each inhale feel like swallowing sand. The logistical foresight necessary for sustaining such a massive force in such a hostile environment was absent, overshadowed by the underestimated severity of the situation and an overinflated sense of the Crusaders' capability. The march was not merely a physical journey, but a descent into a purgatory crafted by neglect and poor planning. As the sun moved overhead, the situation deteriorated with each faltering step. Knights known for gallantry became shadows of their former selves, while foot soldiers struggled, their hopes sinking into the merciless ground beneath them. Soon the Crusaders were faced with a more relentless adversary, the oppressive heat and thirst. The desolate landscape provided no refuge, and the armor that once offered protection felt more like a furnace, amplifying their agony. The confident march, at first filled with bold war cries, turned into a sluggish trek, marked by whispers of despair. The scant water sources, overwhelmed by their desperation, quickly dwindled. The mirage of water was a cruel jest by nature, driving the parched soldiers to hallucinations. Attempts to inspire the troops became futile gestures. Leaders, their voices cracked and lips chapped, urged perseverance. However, hope was a currency running thin. The onset of dehydration triggered vertigo and eerily amplified disillusionment. Promises of relief grew hollow against the stark reality of their dwindling strength. Cohesion cracked as minds dulled by thirst grew suspicious of weakness among brothers in arms. The most stoic Crusaders felt their resilience slip as they battled the ruthless elements, caught in a war they did not foresee, a call to arms neither for conquest nor retreat, but for survival. The journey continued under the relentless sun, with subtle threads of dissent beginning to unravel the Crusaders' resolve. Confidence in King Guy wavered as murmurs of doubt edged into open questions of strategy. The presiding fear was survival, overshadowing any desire for glory. Dissent threatened to kindle rebellion, a pretext of festering resentment, both inward and outward. Even the strongest seemed vulnerable as troops moved mechanically forward, cohesion unraveling amidst the silent march. In the midst of this internal turmoil, an unseen adversary operated with a strategic genius. Saladin's orchestration expertly led the Crusaders deeper into his carefully laid trap. His network of scouts and informers kept the Crusaders ever marching in mirage pursuit. Saladin understood psychological warfare, manipulating the very essence of the ill-fated march. The desert served as an ally, an extension of his reach, pushing the Crusaders to waste resources in a battle wrought against nature. Faith, once a steadfast ally, turned deceptive under the searing sun of Hattin. When supplies ran low and physical suffering tested spiritual resolve, the cracks in divine belief began to show. Silence in their darkest hours weighed heavily on those who once believed in providence. As skepticism crept in, the struggle between faith's fragile truths and the encroaching reality wove a complex narrative of belief and disbelief within the devastated ranks. The journey also laid bare the harsh social stratification within the Crusaders. Knights and nobles fared better, clinging to remnants of water and dignity, while foot soldiers endured the worst of the suffering. Yet even privilege could not save them from the desolate reality. As trust within ranks collapsed and survival instincts took over, class disparities sharpened amidst the shared struggle, driving wedges where cohesion should have prevailed. Through it all, the Crusaders continued their relentless march under a starry vigil that offered a macabre solace. The celestial witnesses above provided little comfort to those below, who drew strength from the sky's indifferent gaze. The pace, driven by desperation and bleak duty, became both a necessity and a curse. With each faltering step, the Crusaders battled time itself against the monstrous expanse of their own injury and ambition. Mired in tactical errors born from misplaced confidence, the Crusaders clung to hopes resting on unstable foundations. Day by day, reality surged past heroism, and the inescapable force of history perched on their shoulders, dictating fate's relentless course. As their tragic campaign struggled towards an inevitable endpoint, a haunting sense of destiny prevailed, extending over the desert like a phantom, an echo of an empire's impending twilight. The Crusader army, weary and parched after a merciless march under the sweltering July sun, found themselves camped beneath the foreboding silhouette of the horns of Hattin. These twin hills rose sharply against the night sky, casting shadows that danced with flickering campfires. The men, beleaguered by exhaustion, bustled about with a tense energy, preparing for a night that offered little respite. Their encampment was alive with the clatter of armor being removed, the murmured prayers of the devout, and the restless sounds of horses. Yet beneath these sounds was an unspoken understanding. They were trapped. Saladin had strategically chosen this amphitheater-like terrain, and from its perimeter, his forces encircled the Crusaders like a tightening noose. Distant echoes of his watchmen seemed amplified by the contours of the land, intensifying the sense of imminent doom. For the Crusaders, each spark from their dwindling fires felt like a countdown, the air thick with anxiety and the gnawing awareness of their diminishing water supply. Every soldier, from the lowliest footman to King Guy himself, whispered silent prayers, hoping for either divine intervention or some miracle by dawn. As the sun rose, it unveiled a desolate scene, dry, arid land stretching as far as the eye could see, hemmed in by hills now stark against the brightening sky. The rising heat was unforgiving, and thirst clawed at the men's resolve. The strategic brilliance of Saladin's encirclement dawned on them with each oppressive ray of sunlight. Panic, like a slow-moving fog, crept through the ranks, a predator sensing the vulnerability of its prey. The Crusaders, skilled and seasoned from years of warfare, found themselves confronting a new and insidious adversary: despair. The relentless midday sun bore witness to Saladin's forces shifting ever closer, a calculated movement that tightened the trap around the Crusaders. From their vantage points, Muslim archers unleashed a torrent of arrows, each shaft a testament to death or desperation. This was no mere exchange of projectiles. It was warfare as psychological weaponry, designed to sap morale and incite chaos. Within the Crusader camp, shields were hastily raised in formation, forming a defensive shell against the falling rain of arrows. Men huddled beneath them, whispering prayers and reassurances, each breath a test of faith and endurance. Smoke and dust soon mingled with the air, courtesy of fires lit by Saladin's men. This thickened the atmosphere, an oppressive veil that stung eyes and seared throats. The acrid smells invaded the Crusaders' senses, an atmospheric horror show that blurred vision and sowed further disorder. Knights, now grimy and worn, struggled to maintain their bearings amidst the spreading chaos. The landscape was becoming a vision straight out of hellish medieval depictions. Within this tempest of confusion and fear, thoughts of salvation flickered and dimmed. Whispers spread of allies who had abandoned them, the reinforcements that never came. Despair took root and spread, a sense of betrayal reaching through ranks like a chilling breeze. King Guy, no stranger to misfortune, clung to a rapidly fading hope that some deliverance awaited beyond the smoke. Yet as the day wore on, each soldier came to a stark realization. They were all alone, entwined in a fateful dance with destiny itself. Amidst the swirling dust and smoke and the relentless assault from all sides, the Crusaders made one last attempt to rally. Fear and courage intertwined as seasoned knights surged forward in counterattacks, vain attempts to break the encircling forces and reclaim a sliver of control. These were acts of sheer will and desperation, fueled by the fervent desire to turn the tide of battle. But Saladin's encirclement, a masterpiece of strategy, held firm. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a long shadow over this battlefield of bitter contest, echoes of grief rose from the Crusader camp, a lament for dreams lost and lived soon to follow. Prayers once robust with conviction now sounded fragile against the backdrop of clashing steel and the mournful cries of the wounded. The very hills, the stark horns of Hattin, seemed to wear this lament as a crown, silently witnessing the unraveling of ambition before their ancient gaze. The final act was relentless, an unyielding march towards an inevitable surrender. Saladin's forces, once merely whispers on the wind, moved in with assertive confidence, closing the circle with a precision honed by skill and fate. For the Crusaders who had once embarked on this journey with divine aspirations, this was a bitter, ironic denouement, a proud crusade reduced to a sobering, cautionary tale. Saladin, more than just a victor, emerged as the arbiter of a newfound historical narrative. As dust settled and smoke drifted skyward, the day concluded with a solemn, transformative silence, a resonating end to the Crusaders' tragic endeavor amidst the horns of Hattin. As dawn brushed the horizon, the Crusader camp awoke to a scene of despair. Smoke from Saladin's fires lingered, casting a pall over the army's waning spirits. Thirst was a fierce enemy, tongues sticking to dry mouths as they surveyed the remnants of their camp, all that remained of their former strength. There was no retreat, only the grim task ahead. Beyond the hills, an enemy waited, their armor a sea of steel glinting in the harsh sun, as if the earth itself was steeped in blood in resignation. The Crusaders, clad in heavy armor, moved with a solemn rhythm. Their chainmail clinked like a death knell as they trudged toward the horns of Hattin. The true cross, raised high, was their desperate talisman against advancing doom. The intense heat conjured mirages, twisting the landscape into a hellish vision. Witnesses would later describe it as if hell itself had unfurled upon the land, the battlefield its fiery stage. Parched beyond reason, the Crusaders found themselves prisoners to a brutal thirst. Voices rose in a crescendo of desperation, where the cries for water drowned out the clash of swords. Victory and divine purpose gave way to hallucinations of distant streams just beyond enemy lines. Promises of salvation veiled in illusion. Saladin's forces controlled access to water, converting it into a weapon more deadly than any blade. They watched as the Crusaders grew mad with thirst, squeezing them with the pitiless inevitability of a giant serpent. Driven by despair, the Crusader commanders ordered charge after futile charge, hoping momentum might break Saladin's hold. Mounted knights, weary and encased in suffocating armor, galloped towards enemy lines. These were not the gallant charges of old, but desperate lunges against Saladin's unyielding ranks. Dust clouded the air, arrows rained down, and each charge collided with the consistency of a wave crashing against unbreakable cliffs. Knights fell, felled by arrows, swords, and exhaustion. Behind the knights, the infantry observed the relentless charges with growing dread. As each faltered, chaos reigned, eroding resolve honed over long marches through foreign lands. Hope evaporated like mist under the noon sun, leaving only the raw instinct of self-preservation. In moments of silence, the primal urge to survive overrode glory and duty. Armor was shed in a frantic bid for speed, turning the retreat into a scene of chaos, not the actions of crusading warriors, but of men clutching desperately at life. Amid this pandemonium, Saladin's forces struck a devastating blow, capturing the true cross, the very symbol of divine favor. They robbed the Crusaders not just of a relic, but of morale. The sight of it in enemy hands was a knife to the heart, confirming what many feared. Heaven itself had turned away. This prize became Saladin's banner, a psychological weapon that deepened the Crusaders' despair. With command in tatters, King Guy of Lusignan struggled to maintain control. His once authoritative presence diminished to a hollow shell as doubt overwhelmed him and his commanders. Infighting further weakened the resolve of nobles as whispers of blame and plots of personal escape festered. What semblance of unity remained unraveled like cloth in the wind, leaving the army adrift, leaderless and scattered. Fear seeped into the knights' hearts, binding them in invisible chains. These armored figures, once seen as legends, now stood haunted by unseen terrors. Fear of dying unnoticed under a relentless sun in a foreign land, far from kith and kin, chipped away at granite resolve. With each swing of the sword, doubt crept deeper, and knightly honor faded into the dust. The reliance on steel, the weapon of salvation, proved a cruel betrayal. Encased in iron, the warriors pressed on, clashing with an enemy as resolute as they were disciplined. The sun glared on reflective armor, blinding senses and evaporating dreams of chivalric victory. Their strength diminished, hammered by Saladin's cruel strategy and the land's unforgiving nature. Metal failed, becoming a mere testament to desperation. Unity shattered under relentless pressure. The cohesive power of this army dissolved. Fragmented units struggled amidst dust and carnage. Once unified ranks now drifted like islands within a storm. Pikes splintered, shields broke, and bodies fell, not with a noble stand, but amidst frantic despair. They were no longer an army of faith and conquest. They were shadows clinging to the remnants of dreams. In the aftermath, it was clear that the crusading dream had crumbled at Hattin. Where once a formidable crusade lay, only remnants remained, scattered like the bones of a fallen giant. The defeat extended far beyond the battlefield, causing ripples across lands and waking rulers and peasants alike from illusion. The Crusader states faced decline, and with them faded the ideals of European ambition. This battle shattered not only an army, but a vision. The backbone of a kingdom now lay broken in the dust. Echoes from Hattin's tragedy would continue to reverberate, reaching across time as a cautionary tale, reshaping history with its stark reminder of ambition's fragility and history's harsh, unyielding lessons. As the dust began to settle from the Battle of Hattin, the once mighty Crusader army lay in ruins. The oppressive sun cast its unforgiving glare upon a battlefield strewn with fallen soldiers, their bodies a testament to the brutality of the clash. Survivors, weary and broken, were rounded up by Saladin's forces, their moans punctuating the silence left in the wake of battle, while the distant cheers from Muslim warriors celebrating echoed through the air. For the Crusaders, the aftermath was a sobering reckoning with their pride and strategic misjudgments laid bare on the sun-scorched earth. Saladin, the astute tactician, understood this victory was as much a moral triumph as a strategic one, signaling the ebbing of Crusader resistance in the Holy Land. The remnants of the Crusader army, subdued and conquered, were gathered into groups, with soldiers separated from nobles and esteemed knights. Stripped of their armor and noble banners, which were ground into the dust, these captives stood in stark defeat, engulfed by the odor and sounds of victory that swirled around them. The jubilant cries of Muslims giving thanks to Allah for their deliverance contrasted sharply with the Crusaders' dejection, their spirits as fractured as their bodies. Among them, allies and former rivals stood together in shared lament, facing an uncertain future. Among the captured stood King Guy of Lusignan, the frail monarch whose leadership had already sown discord before the march on Hattin. Taken prisoner, he was presented to Saladin in a moment of stark contrast. The defeated king, weary and tense, met Saladin, calm and poised in victory. Despite his fall from power, King Guy attempted to maintain his regal bearing, though the weight of his missteps was undeniable. His capture was a coup for Saladin, underscoring the Muslim leader's dominance and the increasingly tenuous Crusader presence in the region. In a gesture of magnanimity, Saladin extended royal courtesy to King Guy. Known for his chivalry, he offered the captive king a cup of iced rose water, a gesture of grace which underscored the Arabian principle of hospitality, even to former foes. For King Guy, accepting this drink was more than survival. It was an acknowledgement of Saladin's authority and a fleeting reprieve from the stark reality that his crown now symbolized little more than shattered glory. While some noble prisoners were granted clemency, the fate of the Knights Templar and Hospitallers was sealed with severity. Regarded by Saladin as relentless extremists, these formidable warrior monks embodied the Crusaders' unyielding zeal and were thus prime candidates for retribution. In a calculated move to break their spirit, Saladin decreed their swift execution. As the sun dipped below the horizon, these bound knights were led in a somber procession to their grim fate. Kneeling on the parched earth, they met their end with the stalwart dignity expected from those devoted to battle. Saladin's decision was strategic, albeit ruthless, aiming to demoralize the crusading effort and announce the decline of Christian military supremacy in the region. In the wake of the executions, Saladin sought solitude to offer prayers for the fallen. This act highlighted the duality of a leader who wove the threads of faith and power intricately. His prayers reflected a plea for peace and reconciliation, seeking divine guidance amidst the chaos of war. For Saladin, this contemplation underscored not only the victory's historical weight, but also his belief in the righteousness of his cause. The capture of countless crusaders at Hattin revealed the intricate dynamics of medieval warfare. To the victors, these prisoners were more than mere spoils. They were assets for negotiation and leverage. Noble captives like King Guy were retained for potential ransom, while others faced uncertain, harsher fates. For lesser-ranked soldiers, captivity often meant servitude or incorporation into the victor's ranks, translating the upheaval of battle into the monotony of survival? On the grand stage of medieval warfare, capturing prisoners was integral to strategy. The chivalric code dictated that esteemed opponents be treated with some honor and given ransom opportunities, blending economic utility with knightly decorum. For Saladin, employing skilled captives and leveraging high-profile prisoners reflected pragmatic outcomes of such a victory. This nuance punctuated the realities of medieval warfare, a time when a captive's worth was measured more in their skills than their life. Thrust into uncertain captivity, the captured mustered resilience amidst adversity. Denied rank and comfort, these knights braved tight quarters, scant rations, and the specter of disease. Yet their enduring spirit shone in unexpected camaraderie and acts of shared faith. Such resilience spoke to their cultural convictions and their unwavering dedication to their cause. The fall at Hattin also reshaped the essence of medieval chivalry, with the massacre of the Templars and Hospitallers. Core tenets of knighthood, valor, loyalty, and the Crusader mission were challenged. This battle stripped away the romanticized veneer of chivalry, casting a critical light on the interplay of divine providence and human folly. Saladin's triumph challenged the narrative that God favored the Crusader cause, instigating introspection within knightly circles and sparking a reevaluation of strategy and purpose across Europe. In Saladin's court, the victory solidified his role as leader and unifier. His strategic brilliance at Hattin enhanced his reputation, portraying him as a champion who reclaimed lands from Christian hands. Beyond territorial gains, this victory galvanized continuous campaigns and strengthened his followers' resolve in their sacred mission. Hattin, more than a battle, became a cornerstone of Saladin's legacy, a testament to leadership intertwined with the banners of faith. In the chilling aftermath of the Battle of Hattin, the Crusader states were left like a landscape littered with ashes. The Christian armies, once revered for their strength, lay shattered and weak, their remnants echoing the cries of defeat and the smothering silence of a lost cause. The very ground, scattered with the decayed armor and the bodies of failed knights, felt haunted, bearing witness to the power hubris had in shaping unthinkable consequences. With dust swirling and acrid smoke from fires set by Saladin's men hovering like a ghostly shroud, the air was thick with foreboding and the finality of defeat. This devastating collapse extended beyond broken swords and sullied morale. Castles, once steadfast guardians of Christian presence, now stood vulnerable, their walls undermanned and their gates trembling on unstable hinges. Panic took root, spreading among a populace long bruised by endless conflict. Whispered rumors of advancing Muslim forces filled the air, hanging like a harbinger of doom over weary towns and villages. The people faced a bitter reckoning, hoping against hope for mercy from a conqueror they had long dreaded. No longer could they escape the reality that the Battle of Hattin was more than just military ruins. It was a prophecy of a kingdom's impending fall. Yet on the victorious side, Saladin's aspirations reached further than a single battlefield. A tactician of both the mind and the sword, he cast his eyes toward Jerusalem, an enticing prize of immense spiritual and political gravity. He knew its defenders were faltering, their unity fractured. With each deliberate step toward the city, he eroded their will to fight, his progress as much psychological as it was physical. The air of desolation further loosened already fragile Crusader resolves. The very mention of Saladin's growing shadow enough to sow doubt and fear amidst Jerusalem's once steadfast defenders. Hattin's echo inside the city walls was relentless, whispering dread and futility in equal measure. Yet even in his advance, Saladin tempered his strategies with an unexpected mercy. Known for his chivalry, even in an age when such traits were scarce, he approached Jerusalem's inevitable siege with calculated leniency. Instead of coercion through sheer brutality, he offered surprisingly generous terms of surrender. The resolve to spare lives while securing victory painted him as a wise and judicious ruler, an image that even his adversaries could not dismiss. His magnanimity arose not just from kindness, but from a sharp political foresight that understood stability was his ally, not scorched land. His olive branch offered a bloodless transition of power, ensuring his rule seeded firm roots without the need for needless destruction. Thus, on October 2, 1187, After assessing their bleak possibilities, Jerusalem's leaders surrendered to Saladin. A city that had basked under nearly a century of Christian rule now found itself returning to Muslim hands. The terms lenient by medieval standards permitted residents to buy their freedom, with many unable to pay having their ransoms covered by fellow citizens, enabling them to leave the city untouched. As agreements etched in solemnity took form, so too did a transformation in the city's air, from one of terror to one of stoic acceptance. The procession of souls leaving Jerusalem included noble knights and humble peasants alike, each laden with their possessions, forging a poignant sight against the backdrop of departing domes and spires amidst a hushed silence. Central to this exchange was the profound loss of the true cross, captured by Saladin after Hattin. More than mere wood, this relic symbolized Christendom's divine favor, a poignant guarantor of their mission's sanctity. Its absence rippled despair across European Christendom, challenging faith and prompting existential crises amidst a halo of inevitable defeat. Saladin, acutely aware of its importance, retained the relic as a symbol not merely of victory, but equally of strategy. He exhibited it as a testament to Christian failure, yet respected its sanctity, realizing its capture reverberated through hearts more painfully than swords ever could. This turning of the tide unraveled Jerusalem's political fabric, casting hundreds of its people onto roads they had never anticipated traveling. Families fragmented, displaced citizens carrying their scant belongings into an uncertain future, while the power dynamics they once knew vanished behind them. This refugee exodus mapped a trail of anguish and strength over foreign terrains, their paths shrouded with memories of a Christian kingdom now vanishing into legend. They marched not just across land, but into a saga of adaptability, a living testament to the ebb and flow of time, marked by humans clinging to homes in the fault lines of history's relentless churn. Amidst all this chaos, the Western kingdoms responded with zeal. The loss of Jerusalem, a wound deeper than any blade, sent tremors through Europe. Outrage at the fall of such a sacred city ignited fervor, spurring vows for renewal and reclamation. Leaders summoned their people toward the cause of a third crusade, led by iconic figures such as Richard the Lionheart and Philip of France. Fervent speeches bloomed into campaigns laced with promises of redemption and retribution, a confluence of devotion and political intrigue hurtling across the continent toward the Levant. Thus, Jerusalem's fall signaled a sobering shift within the narrative of the Crusades. It was not merely territorial loss. It transcended into a transformation, reshaping an era of ambition into one of defense. In the stories passed down through generations, Hattin and the reclaiming of Jerusalem became tales of chivalry, divine intention, and the timeless dance of faith-driven conflict. These echoes continue to sculpt how we perceive those distant yet intimately close human battles with dominion and salvation, a testament to the resilient core within human endeavor, ever grappling with the shadows that history casts. In the wake of the disastrous Battle of Hattin, the news spread through Europe like an unsettling rumor, whispered through drafty castle corridors. From bustling marketplaces to solemn monasteries, couriers arrived with tales of Christian defeat, their weary faces bearing witness to the severity of what they bore. By the time they reached the heartlands, stories had warped with fear and imagination into dire legends. A divine omen, many said, of God's disappointment with a Christendom divided by strife and excess. This unwelcome news shook Europe's mighty foundations. From the opulent thrones of kings to the humble pews of village churches, noble and commoner alike pondered their place in this celestial drama, their thoughts turning toward redemption. Discussions of Jerusalem's fall echoed somberly through courts and cottages, linking the fate of that distant sacred city directly to the heart of Christian identity itself. The prevailing question was clear: how could this collapse be transformed into a recapture? Pope Gregory VIII issued a rallying cry in response, a papal bull titled Audita Tremendi. With words that stirred both guilt and hope, he beckoned kings, knights, and common folk to the cross, urging them to wrest the Holy Land back from Muslim hands. Promises of spiritual salvation resonated deeply, penetrating layers of pious intent and political strategy alike. Europe buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose as the Pope's call for penitence walked hand in hand with the promise of glory. Among those inspired into action stood Richard the Lionheart, the resolute King of England. His heart, already stirred by tales of Christian suffering, sparked with determination. For Richard, the call to crusade was more than an act of faith. It was a stage for personal valor and a chance to stitch his legacy into the fabric of history. A crusader not of necessity but of fierce conviction, Richard vowed to lead the charge himself, ensuring that England played a pivotal role in what would become the unfolding saga of the Third Crusade. Not far behind him, Philip of France also took up the cross, driven by a blend of obligation and rivalry. His relationship with Richard was as complex as it was strategic, walking a tightrope between competition and cooperation. Yet Philip understood the importance of a united Christian offense. The prospect of glory and influence was enticing, a chance to eclipse his English counterpart and leave a French mark on the sands of the East. Enlistment surged, fueled by both genuine faith and the desire for earthly gain. Financing this holy expedition became a Herculean task. Across Europe, the lands and treasures of noble houses were marshaled, sold, or mortgaged to fund the journey. Richard, not sparing even his own coffers, famously drained England's treasury and levied extraordinary taxes, notably the Saladin tithe, named with a hint of biting irony in honor of the very sultan they aimed to oppose. Philip too engaged his realm's resources with similar commitments. The venture became an intricate ballet of medieval economics, politics interwoven with devout piety, as if Europe itself was wagering its fate for both earthly salvation and divine favor. As armies assembled under regal banners, the air vibrated with anticipation. The logistics of such a grand mobilization were profound, with sailors readying ships and knights sharpening swords. Ports buzzed like restless hives as supplies were compiled and strategies whispered over maps. Against this backdrop, clergy led the Crusaders in spiritual preparation, emphasizing purity as much as prowess. Knights knelt for blessings, vows were taken, sins confessed, and indulgences offered as sacred assurance for what lay ahead on this dangerous pilgrimage. Finally came the day of departure. Soft dawn light illuminated seaside towns, now swollen with crusaders eager for the horizon. Families gathered for farewells, hiding fears behind brave smiles as banners snapped in the salty breeze. Inevitably, emotions stirred, a potent cocktail of pride and apprehension coloring the shores as vast ships swayed, ready to carry their human cargo into the mysterious embrace of the Mediterranean. The ghost of Hattin, ever looming, lingered as the Crusaders set forth, an indelible mark upon the European psyche. That fateful loss now served as a cautionary tale, fueling resolve and reminding all of past vulnerabilities. Its mention was a whispered vow among knights who bore this legacy as a catalyst for renewed tenacity. Chroniclers echoed its tale in somber prose, sermons retold its lessons, and as firelight flickered in castle halls, Hattin's shadow merged with stories of resilience. As they sailed away, the Crusaders carried more than weapons and supplies. They bore a Europe unified by faith, ambition, and an unwavering resolve to rewrite their shared destiny. Against a backdrop of divine mandate and knightly honor, they ventured into an uncertain future. Their fates entwined with the echoes of a battle that, though lost, had forged their renewed crusade and shaped a continent's enduring narrative. The Battle of Hattin, fought on a blistering July day in 1187, shook the foundations of the Holy Land. Before that fateful encounter, the Crusader estates held sway over key parts of the Levant, their dominance tenuously secured by a tapestry of castles and bolstered by the stern warriors of the Templars and Hospitallers. Yet the disaster at Hattin laid bare their vulnerabilities, exposing the fault lines of fragmented alliances and stretched resources. This conflict was much more than a mere military rout. It was a symbolic collapse echoing through both Christian and Muslim worlds. Saladin's victory transformed him into a figure of legend, while the Crusaders' devastating defeat became a grim warning against overreach. Hattin marked a definitive pivot, shifting the tide of power across the medieval landscape. Where once the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem stood as a beacon of Western might amidst the Islamic world, post-Hattin, it signified hubris and fragmentation. The Christians pushed on to the defensive, now faced a resolute and emboldened Saladin. Unifying diverse Muslim factions, he recast their efforts under the banner of jihad, rallying support that had languished in division. Saladin's rise was not just about swords clashing under the sun, but of ideological resurgence. As he steered Muslim lands toward unity and strength, Saladin himself emerged from Hattin not just as a conqueror, but as an architect of a new order. A figure of Kurdish descent, his strategic brilliance and nuanced diplomacy elevated him into mythic status. His victory wasn't merely about military triumph, but an ideological one, highlighting a vision of jihad that resonated across ethnic and regional divides. Saladin's statesmanship, marked by both determination and fairness, made him a statesman of lasting renown, revered in chronicles from both East and West as a leader who transcended the battlefield. In the wake of Hattin's sunlit slaughter, the Crusader states teetered on collapse. Deprived of their martial elite and sacred symbols such as the true cross, seen as a divine protector, the once resilient city-states of Acre, Jaffa, and Tyre found themselves exposed and isolated, the connective tissue of Crusader territories shredded. This triggered a desperate scramble amongst the nobility, a chaotic dance of power grabs and failed alliances as each sought to salvage their fortunes amidst Saladin's advancing forces. With uncoordinated defenses and internal strife, the Crusader states sank into paralysis and awaited assistance from Europe, aid that would come too late. The impact of Hattin reached its crescendo with the loss of Jerusalem, the holy city, the crown jewel of Crusader ambitions. After Hattin, defending Jerusalem became a futile hope. Saladin's methodical advance culminated in its capture just months later. Saladin's tactics, offering leniency and negotiated surrender over bloodshed, humiliated the remnants of Christian leadership and sent shockwaves across Christendom. Jerusalem's fall was perceived not just as a strategic loss, but as a spiritual blow that reverberated through Europe and would galvanize the Third Crusade. News of Hattin's catastrophe and Jerusalem's fall traveled swiftly, igniting Europe into action. The Third Crusade saw monarchs like Richard the Lionheart and Philip of France rally troops to restore their faith. Yet despite their grand ambitions and resources, internal squabbles and logistical nightmares plagued their campaign. Though they captured Acre and won at Arsuf, they failed to retake Jerusalem. This incomplete endeavor highlighted persistent issues like disunity and strategic missteps. Echoes of Hattin's dark lessons resounded once more. As tales of Hattin circulated, it transcended historic reality into legend, embedding itself in the cultural consciousness of both East and West. In Europe, it became a somber tale of divine punishment and noble failure, romanticized in song and sermon alike. The loss of the true cross intensified this narrative, likened to sacred quests that spiraled into mythic quests and pilgrimage. In the Islamic world, Saladin himself became a paragon of faith and heroism, his legacy sealed as a standard-bearer of unity and piety. In the aftermath, with swords sheathed and blood dried, diplomacy took center stage for the Crusaders, who scrambled to negotiate what military arms could not secure. Letters flew to Europe and Byzantine courts, but diplomatic overtures often faltered. Potential allies viewed the Crusader states as burdens rather than boons. Meanwhile, Saladin's adept diplomacy reshaped the political map of the Levant, forging alliances through marriage, negotiation, and calculated mercy. Hattin showed that the Holy Land's shifting power dynamics required not just warriors, but diplomats who could weave alliances as expertly as wielding a sword. Religiously, Hattin inspired introspection and movement toward reformation within Western Christendom. Many viewed the loss as divine disfavor, compelling calls for repentance and renewal. Sermons blared warnings of forgotten piety. While Muslim factions extolled Saladin's model of an ideal ruler, his exceptional piety was praised, invigorating the notion of a righteous jihad and perpetuating mobilization efforts. Thus, Hattin's echoes resounded in religious fervor and theological debate, shaping narratives long past its smoky aftermath. Yet it wasn't just conflict that followed. Cultural exchange flourished in Hattin's wake. Crusader presence, though diminished, facilitated a begrudging exchange of arts, ideas, and innovations with their Muslim neighbors. While tenuous, these interactions enriched the cultural tapestry of the Mediterranean, Genial exchanges set against a backdrop of violence lent depth to the historical narrative, suggesting that mutual influence threaded through a chaotic period. As we wrap up this tale, remember history, like the night skies above Hattin's battlefield, is full of endless stories, all competing to illuminate our understanding of today's world. If you found this journey through medieval scent and sword captivating, consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Let's continue exploring these echoing corridors of time together, shedding light on the darkness of our shared past.